A young family, John, Sarah, and their young daughter Emily, moved into an old house on the outskirts of town. The house was dilapidated but charming, and they hoped to start a new life. The first few days passed quietly. They unpacked, enjoying quiet evenings by the fireplace. One day, John found an antique mirror in the basement, covered in dust and cobwebs. "Sarah, look what I found!" he shouted. Sarah stepped closer, looking at the elegant frame and dim glass. "What a beauty, John! It must be very old," she said, smiling. John set the mirror in the corner of the basement, and they forgot about it for a while. A few days later, John noticed strange shadows in the mirror. "Sarah, do you see it too?" he asked, looking at her reflection. "What shadows, John? I think you're imagining things," she replied, but her voice trembled. At night, they heard low whispers coming from the basement, and Emily became afraid to go down there. One evening, when everyone was gathered for dinner, Emily suddenly said, "Mom, Dad, I saw myself in the mirror, but I was different." John and Sarah looked over at each other. "Don't be silly, dear," John said, but his voice sounded unsure. He decided to go down to the basement and figure it out. The night was quiet, like the night before a storm. John went down to the basement carrying a flashlight. Sarah and Emily stayed upstairs, listening intently. An hour passed, and John did not return. Sarah, gripped with worry, took Emily's hand and headed downstairs. When they descended, the basement was shrouded in an ominous cold. The mirror glowed dimly, and they saw John standing in front of it. "John, are you okay?" Sarah shouted. John turned around, and his eyes were as blank as a doll's. "Sarah, help me." His voice sounded muffled as if from far away. Sarah grabbed Emily and tried to run, but the reflections in the mirror began to move on their own. Suddenly, Sarah's reflection reached out and grabbed her wrist. "Mom!" Emily screamed, but her voice faded into the silence of the basement. The next morning, the house was empty. No one from the family had made contact. Neighbors, concerned about the absence of John, Sarah, and Emily, called the police. Officers found only an antique mirror in the basement, where shadows could still be seen whispering words no one could understand. The house was quiet again, but the mirror held a dark secret, forever locking the family's souls inside its glass.